Welcome to Becoming Church, the podcast where we discuss how the message and movement of Jesus is not just about becoming Christians, but about becoming the church. I'm your host, Kristin Mockler-Young, and my guest today is Dr. Joel Muddamalle. Joel is a theologian, author, basketball enthusiast, and one of the only men on staff at Proverbs 31, a ministry designed for and mainly run by women. My interview with him was a genuine friend conversation that made me laugh, learn, and have to humble my own self. So I hope the same is true for you today. Thanks for listening, and here's my chat with Joel Muddamalle. All right, Joel Muddamalle, welcome to the Becoming Church podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Kristin. How are you?
I'm good. Listen, it's not often that I get to interview somebody that I've actually shared a bowl of queso with after church on a Sunday morning. So this is fun.
Yeah. Not only have you shared queso, but you've also had the privilege of seeing my children absolutely chaotic and crazy, fighting over each other, fighting for the queso, fighting to sit next to you. I think, my wife and I were like, wow, this is so nice. They just want to hang out with Kristin and have nothing to do with us. So actually, we need to do that again soon. That's
we
really
do. We do. Tell you what, this time I'll bring my two girls.
There you go.
They can play with your kids and we can actually maybe have an adult conversation. That would be fantastic.
That'd be nice. Imagine that.
Oh my gosh. Well, you do, for those of you who go to Mosaic or follow Mosaic, listen to sermons or watch things online, you probably already know Joel because he is a friend of Mosaic. He speaks with us regularly. I think our people just consider you family at this point.
Yeah. Well, I consider y'all family too. So
wow.
It's mutual completely.
It's mutual. But your day job, your full job is you work at Proverbs 31, which is I would say female-led, mostly female organization. Are you the only guy that's there?
Yes. Yeah. So Proverbs 31 Ministries, I am one of 4 men that are there. When I first started, actually, this is my 7-year anniversary.
Oh, no way.
Just like a week ago was my 7-year anniversary. And I've been friends and working with the ministry for almost 10 years. So just 3 years before that. But yeah, when I first came on, it was like 2 of us. And the other 2 guys that were in the ministry. So I was number 3. I like to think of like the holy trinity of guys that were working there at the time. We have a little bit of bragging rights. But the other 2 guys were, this is kind of funny, but they were on the IT team. So they were like technology team members, and when I first walked in, if y'all don't know, like I'm Indian, like my parents are from India, immigrated, so when I first walked in, I think some people just kind of expected like the Indian guy would be on the IT team.
Oh my gosh.
And so and I was not, like I am not, and every now and then people are like, hey Joel, can you help me with this? And I'll be like, is it because I'm Indian? And they get so panicked and I'm like, I'm joking, I'm kidding, it is a joke. But I honestly,
you're like, but also no, I can't, I don't know how to do
that. But honestly, I can't now. You got a question about the hypostatic union of Christ? We could have a fun conversation about that. But how to get your Zoom recording to work? Nah, fam. I'm not going to be able to really help with that.
We won't tell people how many times it took us to get this podcast started. So clearly neither of us are technical wizards over here.
Exactly.
So I want to know, Joel, something that you have learned about women in your 7 years of being surrounded by them and working with women. What's something that you've learned?
Oh my gosh. Where do I start? I think one day there's gonna have to be a book about this. I think one of the things that I've found is, and this is a generalization, so I understand that, but in terms of just a general observation that I've made is the ability to truly connect in a way that doesn't require activity. Like y'all can just sit down and get into it, And I think for men, at least for me, I struggle with that. I kind of need some launching pad into conversation. Are we talking about basketball? Are we talking about fantasy football? Are we like, what are we going to do something together? Like, what is the activity that we're going to do that is the entryway into the proximity of intimacy and relationship and all of that? And I've just marveled at just this team that I'm around, that when we have new staff members come in, they can just like sit down at lunch and it's like, they're in, they're connected. And the other thing is y'all are funny, man. Like there's just like fun there's fun inside women jokes that are happening all the time.
Yep.
The Amazon link sharing, I think that's like the new thing, is like everybody's kind of like, who can outdo the other person with their new Amazon clothing find, which I think is
Oh,
hilarious. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It's like, forget Lululemon and Gucci and all this other stuff. It's like, I got this on Amazon, and this was my Amazon link. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm still trying to rock my Nikes.
Yeah.
So if you find
Trying to rock your
Jordans,
Nikes. I was
I'm
going to
trying to.
say, my friend, you have so many pairs.
And then the third thing, so I'll go three things. So then the third thing would
Yes.
just be, because my role is biblical and theological, is what I've learned is just your unique way, women's unique way to think about the text. You ask questions, you think about the Bible, you're exploring the whys and that are happening in the text in a way that kind of my brain doesn't work that way, you know? And so oftentimes I'm sitting at a table just like thinking, literally I'll say, wow, I've never thought about it that way, you know?
Oh, that is
Um,
cool.
yeah. And so I would directly attribute that to just the unique way that God has wired women as the counterpart for humanity, you know, for men. So
Yeah,
I think it's important, which is a
that's
wild
cool.
thought. It's a wild thought to think that without women in the context of teaching and ministry and exploring the Bible, there's half, if you just think about it, there's
Yeah.
half of a perspective that's missing. You know, so
Yeah.
imagine living your entire life with only having half a worldview, or only having half of your body, or only having half of, you know, a slice of pizza. Like, that's painful. Y-
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
why only have half of a slice? You could, like, you know, I'm being a little funny here, but I think the principle plays out in a profound way.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. And I thank you for sharing that. I could go on a whole separate tangent, which we will not do, but I do want to direct people to, I will link up. You've got some really fantastic things. You and I have dialogued about women in ministry and women in leadership and pastors and teaching and all of that stuff. We
Yeah.
aren't going to get into it today, maybe one day, but I will link a lot of it up in the show notes. So if that's something that, as you're listening, you're like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of this, or I can't believe I'm hearing a man talk about, you know, the woman's perspective, especially when it comes to understanding the Bible, I'm going to direct you to the show notes and lots of goodness from Joel. So always appreciate your perspective on that. I do know there is one woman that's influenced you greatly, and I'm going to tell you why. I have a particular specific thing in mind here. So your wife, Brittany,
Hmm.
she's a fantastic follow on Instagram. She is at Almost Indian Wife. And she's
Yes.
very clever when it comes to like reels and using trends to connect to her audience and all the things, right? So now, as someone who has known you and followed you both for a long time, I've watched Brittany, and every now and then you would pop up like in the family roles. And I'm like, oh, look, there's Joel in a reel, and there's Joel like doing a thing. Now, my friend, every time I open my Instagram app, I'm like, there's Joel on the stair stepper, and there's Joel at the airport, and there's Joel at the beach. And you are constantly dropping knowledge like all the time. Was she the reason? Was she your like social media manager and just changed your Instagram game?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I would say so.
Yeah.
You know, Chris, I'm an academic at heart. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, so I really care about
Same.
like, you know, achievement and precision, like all this stuff. And so when it comes to social media, for me, it's a little challenging because I'm like, I want to present like the best, like I want to really get this thing right, you know? And
Yeah.
I think there's a goodness to it. And Britt one day was just like, babe, nobody really cares. Like nobody really cares about like you tied up in a bow and crossing all the T's and dotting all, like people just want to know the
Yeah.
real you. Like
Yeah.
what, you know? And I began to really think about that. And honestly, it's probably a good segue into just the conversation of humility. And I was just like, well, I don't want people to see my weakness. I don't want people to hear me out of breath on a stair stepper because they realize how out of shape I am. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and what if people get annoyed with that? And she was just like, but what if not? Like, what if it's helpful for them to see another human being that is struggling to do 5 minutes on a stair stepper because it's hard for them? You know, like, what
Yeah.
if, like, and I was like, yeah, like, what if? And why is it that I've got this deep-rooted sense of perfection that's in my heart, that I
Mhm.
want everybody to see me in a certain way or look at me or believe something about me versus just the honest truth of who I am, you know? And this
Yeah.
is where I am in my journey. This is the process of sanctification. Like this is what it means to regain my true humanity. And I'm just going to be honest about my weaknesses and my frailty. And I'm going to be honest about things that I don't know. And I'm going to be honest with people about, like, for instance, right now I'm working through the Bible in a year.
Okay.
I had this whole thought, right? I was like, hey, I'm going to, for the first time ever, I'm going to do this chronological Bible in a year plan. And before I invite people to join me, I've got to do it by myself first because I've never done this before. So like,
Oh,
I
I
don't
love
want to be
that.
a guide, I don't want to be a guide
Right.
who's like, and then like Bro was like, well, why? Like,
Yeah.
why not just
Yeah.
like invite a bunch of people with you
Right.
as you do it for the first
Yeah.
time? They can do it with you and I was like, oh,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah, like why not?
I
And
don't have to be an expert on everything before I share it with other people. Yeah.
Exactly. And Kristen, we've had over 3,500 people join this
Oh,
thing,
wow.
and it's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And it's been a truly humbling process for me to just recognize that what people, I think, deeply want is
Hmm.
connection and relatability.
Yeah.
And often what we, in terms of leadership or just even as individuals, what we want to give people is perfection and like an image
Mm-hmm.
of what this
Uh-huh.
looks like. Those things work like directly opposed to each other. So yeah, you'll see some stair stepping. I've got a real actually that's going to go, I think probably tomorrow, on failure, and it's me shooting hoops and missing a bunch of jump shots, and just talking
Awesome.
about like, talking about like the reality of failure. Like there's not a single one of us that can live in the absence of failure. So why in the world do we live a maddening reality of trying to like be faultless without any failure? It
Yeah.
just doesn't make sense.
Well, you're an inspiration to me. So just know that, because I have no problem talking on Instagram when I'm alone, like when I'm in my car, or when I'm in my house, or I'm in a place. And I have tried this where I'm like, I'm going to just do a thing. And then I either completely lose any bit of anything that's relevant or makes any sense whatsoever, or I just get super self-conscious. So that's one of my goals this year is I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do Instagram, and I'm going to talk to people, even if other people are watching me. And it's okay if I look like a goober. It's all right. If it helps one person, then doesn't matter.
I have had a couple people on the stair, like I try to like find a stairmaster by myself, like in a corner,
Yeah.
and there have been a couple times that like I've started by myself and people will like, and there's kind of this unsaid rule that you always try to leave a gap in between. Like you're not trying to go right next to
Sure.
somebody if you don't know them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and this one time, this gal like just I don't know what it was. Maybe that was like her very specific stairmaster she always used, but
Oh,
she like
no.
were like right next to me, and I'm like halfway in and I started my video and she like she came up and I could feel her eyeballs in my neck as I'm doing this thing and get done. And
She's
then she
like,
like
what
asked
are
me,
you doing?
well, she was like, are you like, what were you doing? I was like, oh gosh. Okay. Let me try to explain this. And so,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
You're like, all right, Lord, divine moments while I'm up
yeah,
here puffing it
yeah,
on the stairs ever.
yeah. Well, I look like an absolute mess and a wreck. Yeah.
uh, well, let's talk about your book. You have a book coming out called The Hidden Peace: Finding Security, Strength, and Confidence Through Humility. I want to know, what did you see happening in the world that told you this was a book that was needed?
Um, yeah, I think I saw, and I am seeing a lot of exhaustion, a lot of
Mm,
fearfulness,
mhm,
a lot of anxiety,
mhm.
um, a lot of hustle. Like everybody's hustling,
Yeah.
everybody's grinding. And at the end of it, what most people are really wanting is peace. Like what they want is shalom. What they want is the world rightly ordered. What they're
Mhm.
wanting is for their insides to have a type of fruitfulness that comes outside of them, you
Yeah.
know? And I think, kind of my thesis on this, or like my observation has just been, well, if I can just work harder, if I can get more money, if I can have more influence, if my Instagram could grow to 100,000, if my, videos had these types of likes, like if I put in whatever is your value proposition, that will equal peace,
Mhm.
And it's just not the case. Like,
Yeah.
there's this a rapper who once said, the more money, the more problems.
Uh-huh.
And it's like I kind of have that same basic proverbial principle about everything else. Like
Yeah.
the more Instagram followers, the more comments and critics that you have,
And
the
trolls.
uh
Yeah.
and trolls,
Yes.
the more money you have, the more temptation there is to find satisfaction and security in fleeting things,
Mhm.
all of it, like the larger your family is, the more chaotic it is every day, because every day a new child is getting hurt or sick
Right.
or, having an emotional crisis. And you're thinking, well, I thought if I just had the picture perfect family and it's just like, there is no such thing. And at the end of it, you don't find peace. You're finding more chaos and more
Yeah.
dysfunction and more frustration. And there's more fear that's creeping into your heart. And it's this vicious cycle that just keeps going through. And as I
Mhm.
was just studying and reading the Bible and just working through my own life and my own journey, as a child of an immigrant family, my mom and dad, immigrated to the States in their 20s. I grew up in Chicago, like
Mhm.
literally one of the only Indian kids in a primarily Black neighborhood. And so there, I mean, just like who am I? Where do I belong? How do I fit in? And trying to do all of the things just
Yeah.
aggressively to try to find my place and to find peace. At the end of it, like it just wasn't there. Even my academic journey, doing an undergrad and then an MDiv and a THM and a PhD, and thinking if I can just get these numbers, these little letters in front of my name or after my
Yeah.
name, that's going to give me the sense of security. And at the end of it, Chris, at the end of my PhD journey, I was like, I'm dumb. like I don't.
What?
I'm like, there's so much I don't know. Like, truly, at the end of it,
Okay.
you get done with a PhD, and anybody who gets done with a PhD and thinks I am the gift to God's creation, like, I honestly, I don't want to read any of your books, and I don't
Oh
want to
my
probably be
gosh.
around you.
Yeah.
Like, because at the end of it, you realize, like, you're trying to write on such tiny little spot of like the world of research. And in that, you're getting just ripped apart
Yeah.
day in
Yeah.
and day out on what you don't know. Your German isn't good enough. Your Hebrew isn't good enough. Your Greek's not good enough. Like, you didn't understand this cultural setting in the Second Temple Judaism. Like, you go through all this stuff. And
Wow.
so even that, I'm like, oh, if I can just get a PhD, people call me Dr. Joel, like, great, I've arrived. And now I'm just kind of like, yeah, that's not true. That's so not true. But there is something that the Bible invites us to, that Jesus
Yeah.
himself invites us to, that actually will produce peace for us. And that is the most unexpected thing. People are turned off by it, but the paradoxical nature of the kingdom of God.
Mhm.
It's what's down is up and what's up is down, and it's the gift of humility.
Yeah.
And you're like, people are like, whoa, this what? Like, I'm trying to get peace. I'm trying to get wholeness. I'm trying to get health. I'm trying to deal with my fear and my anxiety. And you're suggesting humility
Humility.
is the way,
Yeah.
they're like,
Mhm.
show me the exit sign. And I just want you to like hold and pause for a second with me and just consider this, that Jesus invites us to his life. And he says, let's do this exchange of yokes. And he says, take on my yoke because I
Mhm.
am gentle and humble, and you will find rest.
Rest.
That
Yeah.
that word rest is nothing less than peace. It's shalom.
Mhm.
You will find true joy, true satisfaction. And yeah, and so I think that has been the journey of what I was seeing in the world to why I wanted to write this. It's not the book that I wanted to write. Like I didn't want like I didn't. I literally I had three ideas
Okay.
when we went to the team, and I was like, and I like actually downplayed this one the worst. I was like, this was actually my idea to make the other two look great, you know?
Right.
And it was kind of overwhelming. It's like, wow, no, like I think God really wants his family to take on the clothing and the life of Christ.
Mhm.
And if we say we love Jesus and we want to be like Jesus, then that really is a call to live the life, the humility way of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, even just flipping through it, I could tell that it was a needed and that it was going to be a good book because it hurt my feelings, honestly, especially in part two.
Thanks. Leave that on
The
the Amazon review.
yes, the whole idea
Great
of
book, hurt my
hurt
feelings.
my feelings, which is a good sign. But part two is called Fighting to Make My Way Work. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, dang, I don't want to read this. And so you've got statements in there, right? Like, I can't keep it all together. I have to win at all costs. I'm not sure I've got what it takes. My heart tells me so. I was like, right, these are all things that I would, statements I would make, which is why it hurts my feelings. But in these chapters, you do something which we actually talked about already, right? Like having a different perspective and seeing things a different way. But you're able to take these statements or these ideas and kind of turn them. And you said in one of the sections, what if I think it was in the first one, what if our lack of control is actually a gracious gift of God? And so I
Right.
feel like you're able to take these statements or thoughts that people have had about themselves or their lives or their lifestyles or God's will even, and help them to shift it a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
Is there
No,
something
that's
that you learned about yourself when you were doing that?
yeah, I learned that I'm a controlling individual that wants people to like me, that wants to be
Perfect.
perfect, and that doesn't want to lose at basketball, and like that I mean, I learned a lot, like, from a therapy standpoint. I learned a lot about the trauma of my childhood
Oh, wow.
growing up
Yeah.
in
Yeah, that's in
Chicago,
there
like
too.
getting
Hmm.
getting made fun of, trying to find myself. There's a reason why I love Jordans today. I think I have a story in there about how, like, as a child, like throughout high school, basically until I had my first job at Jimmy John's. By the way, my first like actual job, not in a church, like interning for like 50 cents a week, but
Yeah.
like actually my first real job was at Jimmy John's.
Awesome.
And like the first paycheck I got was I bought a legit pair of Jordans because growing up my whole life, we bought shoes at Payless. Like my parents were very frugal. I actually realized they
Yeah.
actually had a lot of money, but we didn't. Like my parents had money, like,
Right.
but they're like, you're not gonna have money and you're gonna
Right.
have Payless shoes. And
Hmm.
so we would do the buy one get one half off and the
Oh,
whole nine
yeah.
yards. And I grew up in a very wealthy neighborhood in Illinois, and my friends turned 16, they're driving Beamers, like their parents
Yeah.
hand me down Beamers. And I rolled in like a 1986 Honda Civic. Like it me, like just
Yeah.
totally people could figure out like somebody doesn't belong here,
Right.
you know? And even through all of that, like insecurity of saying like, oh my gosh, like once I have make some money, like I'm never gonna step into a Payless store ever again in my life.
Yeah, I get that.
And so yeah, all of that. And then what I found throughout the research and teaching, just experiential process, is these things that I'm trying to own and capture as my own control. I'm trying to have control of everything, only to find out the more I think I have control, the more I'm losing control.
Yeah.
Fear, like I don't want to face fears. I want to overcome all of my fears and prevent all of my fears, all these things. I've actually came to the realization, and this is really what the text points us to, is that
Mhm.
these things are gracious gifts of God, because what they remind us of is who we are in light of who he is. And so some people are
Mhm.
like, Joel, I don't get humility. And I just have kind of a simple framing for humility. Humility is a three-part action. Humility is simply, first, it starts with knowing God. If I
Okay.
can know who God rightly is, who God is fully, then that frames who I am. So if I can know who God is, I can know who I am. And if I know who God is and I can know who I am, then I can know how I ought to rightly relate to other people. So it's
Mm.
this like three-part movement, and the order matters. So what ends up
Yeah.
happening sometimes is we bypass God and we just want to know ourselves. And the only lens or framework for who we are is our own vices.
Mhm.
And then we relate to other people in light of who we are and what we want. And when we relate to other people, people either become pawns in our life, like chess pieces that we're willing
Yeah.
to sacrifice for our own benefit, or if we have a lack of self-worth and a lack of understanding of our value in the economy of God's kingdom, we become the pawns. We're the
Yeah.
ones who get walked on and hurt, and biblical humility is not that. It's actually something that regains our self-awareness, so we can see something like our lack of control and say, wow, our lack of control is an invitation to trust in the total control that God has. Or
Mhm.
fear. Wow, fear is actually not something that we're supposed to avoid or necessarily overcome and prevent. It's actually something we need to go through,
Yeah.
because it's in the through process of fear that God is transforming us into the image of his son, Jesus.
Yeah.
And so these things do turn on themselves, but they only can turn on themselves when we regain a right awareness of who God is. There's this famous quote, Kristen, I think it's historically attributed to C.S. Lewis. It's debated nowadays,
Okay.
but humility isn't thinking less of ourselves; it's thinking of ourselves less often.
Less. I love that quote.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you're gonna get mad at me now because I'm gonna.
You're gonna ruin it.
I know, and it's dangerous, y'all. It's dangerous to argue with C.S. Lewis. I'm not gonna necessarily like reject what Lewis says, but I'm gonna say that the order matters. And so I actually think it's challenging to think of yourself less or less often when you don't know who you actually are in light of who God is. So it's not that it actually starts with, we need to know God. Like humility is an invitation to understand and view the majesty of who God is so that we can see ourselves rightly.
Well, and I would venture to say, you said we have to know God so we can know who we are, so we know how to relate to other people. I would venture to say that anybody who's like, well, I'm doing this good, and I think I've skipped one. I feel like those are the people who live in echo chambers, where the only
Yeah.
people you're relating to are the people that are exactly like you, or they're telling you that you are exactly who you hope you are.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
challenge, there's no growth. And that's very it's a dangerous place to be also.
Yeah. I'll give you a great example of somebody like that. A couple people in my life are people who think that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. I mean, I'll tell you that right away. Like, why is Joel, who thinks Michael Jordan is the great, doesn't think, I know it, I'm confident of this truth, that Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. Why do I have good friends who believe the opposite? It's a humility thing. It's good for me to hear their whack and wild, like manipulation of data to try to prove to me that, but it gives
so
me
you can be all the more confident in what you know is true.
Yeah. This actually might be hidden pride, not humility, but no, to your point of like, yeah, it's good to have people around us, and it requires humility to be able to sit in a conversation and to sit in a situation, sit in a church, to sit underneath leadership, to sit in vocationally at your work, and to have to work with other people. And you're like, wow, I really dislike them. Like I would not hang out with them in real life, but there's something good here.
Yeah.
If I can make it through the uncomfortableness of what I don't like. And what is the gift that we need in order to make it through that uncomfortableness? It's humility. Because if we can have humility, we can actually glean what is good without having to expose ourselves to all the danger of all the bad stuff,
Yeah. Well, I think it's humility of knowing not only what we don't like, but also being able to enter into what we don't understand or what we don't agree with even. I mean, that's one of the things that we're really trying to do at Mosaic is we keep talking about, we're creating a table where people who wouldn't sit together outside of Mosaic can come into Mosaic and sit together and have conversations. And I mean, you and I don't align 100% on everything that we believe, but we are good friends and we can have these conversations. And when we do have these conversations, it helps me to think and it helps me to process and dig in more. And so I think I think pride and humility go together in more ways than people probably just like on the surface would think, pride is not just about like, I think people often go, oh, well, somebody that's prideful is somebody who's worried about what they look like all the time. Well, pride can also be somebody who thinks that they know everything and is right all the time. I think there's a lot of different layers. There's a quote by Margaret Thatcher that says being powerful is being okay, I'm already messed this up. Being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to tell people that you aren't. And that's how I think about humility, right?
Yeah.
The more people that are like, oh, I'm humble. I'm so humble. Like, I don't know that you are generally. So what are some key things that people could identify in themselves, maybe that might be signs that they need to lean into humility a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, here's one of them is it's okay. So it feels like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, And so you kind of need a little bit of like that. I do this thing called a cold plunge now, Kristin. This is so weird, but I do this thing called a cold plunge.
No, I want to start it.
Yes, I love it. My friend Levi Lusko got me onto it a couple of years ago, and now I'm obsessed. I got Britt into it, so we actually have like a whole cold plunge system in the garage now. It's amazing. But something happens to you when you first get into this cold water. It's like I think ours is set to like 40 degrees, 39. It goes between 39 to 40 degrees. It's very cold. Your body freaks out. Like your body literally goes into like fight, flight, or freak out. Like get the heck out. Or
literally freeze.
You literally freeze, and so when that happens, you have choices to make here. And I think there's a similar kind of connection to humility. Like if you walk into a room and there's a bunch of people that are having a conversation, and you walk up to that conversation, and in your brain, you're thinking, I'm God's gift to this conversation. Whatever people are talking about is nothing compared to what I'm about to say. And you enter the
Yeah.
conversation, and all of a sudden, you notice that the group of three that you joined dwindles to two, dwindles to one, and all of a sudden, you're standing there by yourself. Humility is probably what you need. You
Yeah.
know, like there's just very practical. Like if you find yourself in one-way monologues with people, like if you're just
Mm-hmm.
talking a lot and people are just kind of looking at you with a blank stare, it's like, like humility might be something that could help you in your life to move you from a one-way conversation with people, which is a monologue, to a two-way discussion with people, which is a dialogue. You know, so there's
Yeah.
some very practical things there. Some other things too is just like if you're living constantly frustrated, like if you're constantly thinking in your life, it's always their problem. Why do they
Yeah.
always do this? Why do they all like if your initial reaction to life is they did something and there's no ownership of the fact that, hey, the common denominator is actually you.
Right.
Like where I go, it feels like chaos and dysfunction follow. But my initial reaction is, what's wrong with them?
What's
Okay.
wrong with everyone else?
What's
Yeah.
wrong with them? Okay. So these are invitations to humility. So I think people probably need at this point, like, I need to know exactly what is the payoff for me for humility. And so here's what I would suggest that the Bible teaches and
Okay.
what you're going to get in the book. The payoff for humility absolutely is peace, right? Like you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
peace, but the path to peace is actually self-awareness. It's self-awareness.
Yeah.
Humility gives you the gift of self-awareness. It helps you to see rightly, so you can do rightly. Humility gives you the gift of thinking rightly, so that you can kind of live your life in such a way that does provide peace internally and externally. What pride
Mm-hmm.
does is pride actually hijacks our ability to be self-aware. It distorts our view and our interpretation of things. So pride tells us, hey, I'm going to help you think and live and be the clearest you've ever been. And along the way, all it's doing is creating more distortion in your life, you know? So pride is
Mm-hmm.
like this. This is the imagery. Pride's like a guide, and it's telling you, hey, I want you to come up to this cliff with me. You're going to have the most beautiful view. It's going to be gorgeous. And you're like, yeah, pride's like, absolutely. This is a great guide. I'm going to the very top, you know? And see the beauty. And then pride's like, hey, just pop your head over the cliff, you know, and see what it's like. It's even better with your head dangling over 1,000,000 feet underneath you. And you do that. And then pride pushes you off of the freaking cliff.
Uh-huh.
Like, and you fall. And so it's like, look at the distortion.
Yeah.
Maybe momentarily there's beauty, maybe there's clarity in a moment, but that clarity is a clever disguise to actually distort truth and reality in order to push you off the cliff. What humility does is it regains our self-awareness. Humility is a guardrail for us so that we can actually journey up to the very top of the mountain. And there's a guardrail
Mm-hmm.
that protects us from being pushed off, because we have a right awareness of who we are in light of who God is and what all of created order is, so that we can find ourselves in the perfect place to experience the beauty of creation without buying into the belief that we're the pinnacle of creation.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's good. That's good. I think humility is one of those things. I know for me personally, it's been an incredibly hard lesson to learn, and one that I have had to learn over and over again. Every time I'm like, I've got it, God's like, oh yeah, let me put you in another scenario. Why do you think it is that humility is such a slippery concept to master?
Well, I think one is because we think humility, you just mentioned it. I think a lot of times we think humility is a checklist. It's
Yeah.
something we check off on our box, then we move on from.
Yeah.
I find it super fascinating in the New Testament. Paul, he talks a lot about the fruit of the Spirit. And
Mhm.
he's like, if I didn't know better, like Paul had some side hobby as a farmer or something, because he uses all
Okay.
these agricultural terminologies. And so in Galatians 5, he's got the fruit of the Spirit, and he's using all these agricultural terms. And what's fascinating to me is that he doesn't, in Galatians 5 specifically, he doesn't necessarily talk about the soil that the
Mhm.
fruit are rooted in. And yet everywhere else he does talk about the nature and the soil of the fruit of the Spirit. And so this is a thought that doesn't originate new from me. It's actually a thought that theologians and Bible scholars and teachers have had for ages, you know? And where they get it from is Paul, and where Paul gets it from is Jesus. But the idea actually is that humility isn't a checkbox that we move on from. Humility is actually the soil that the Christian life is cultivated in. So what that means is, just like
Mm.
any good soil, we have to be constantly aware of what is going into the soil, because whatever goes into the soil is going to directly impact what comes out of the soil. And so if you have things like pride, hidden pride in your life, that go into the soil of humility, that corrupts humility in our lives, the fruit that comes out of the Christian life will be corrupted, because the soil has been fragranced by these negative kind of corrupt things. But if you cultivate a life of humility, the soil of your life is humility, then all the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, like you can go through all of them, right? The gifts of the Spirit that God gives
Yeah.
us to be healthy participants of the family of God, like all these things, they're actually going to be fragranced by humility. And humility ends up becoming so vital because it helps us know where and when we ought to use the gifts of the Spirit that God gives us. It
Yeah.
helps us to live empowered by the Spirit, to live out the fruit of the Spirit. And so humility isn't a checkbox that we move on from. It's the soil of the Christian life that we're rooted into. So what that requires of us is a constant return to questioning and looking at this soil that we have. Is it being
Yeah.
corrupted? One of the things I think that is the most dangerous that corrupts the soil of humility is what I've referred to as hidden pride. Uh,
Mm.
Hidden pride is something so destructive and deceitful because it hides in the chambers of the human heart, and it presents itself as the fruit of the Spirit. So
Okay.
hidden pride is like, wait a minute, like I'm like doing all these things for the church, for my family, for my vocation, for my workplace. I'm being patient, I'm being kind. Like it presents itself as the fruit of the Spirit. But at the center of the fruit, it's actually corrupt, because the aim and the ambition isn't the glory of God, it's the glory of
Glory
man.
of
It's
self.
it's
Yeah.
it's the glory of self,
Yeah.
right? And the danger of this is you can actually live out hidden pride for a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
But at some point, as you bite into that fruit and you get all the way down there, you're going to take a bite and it's corrupt.
Yeah.
And you get a bite and you're like, ooh, that didn't taste good. Like, oh,
Mhm.
and then you realize, oh, I'm sick because I've been eating this fruit that has been tainted, that has been corrupt, on the
Yeah.
inside. And humility is this great gift for us because it exposes hidden pride. It ventures into the heart chambers of humanity to be able to help us determine, like, hey, why do I do the things that I do?
Mhm.
Like, what is the actual motivation? Is it my glory or God's glory? And I've said before, but I think it's important. Humanity was never designed to absorb God's glory. We were always created to be reflectors of
Mm.
God's glory. And humility is this beautiful gift that helps us to reflect the glory of God back onto God and onto creation, to point them to the Creator Himself.
Yeah. Humility, it sounds like, has to be a posture. Basically, it's not something that we, you know, learn, check off, like you said, but it almost becomes the posture with which we do everything. And we do
Yeah.
everything through all of our conversations, our thoughts, our behaviors. I think everything has to come, through a lens, through a posture of humility. Um, so for
And I
people
would
that are
just make this
listening,
out.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let me just make this last little comment here. Like, this isn't exclusive to Christianity. Like,
Oh, for
this is
sure.
an
Yeah.
eternal truth. Like, I was watching a documentary about two incredible comedians. Actually, I'll just say who they are: Kevin Hart and Chris Rock. So
Okay.
it's this Netflix documentary, and it's kind of going through their stories together, and it talks about Chris Rock's direct influence on Kevin Hart's life. Like, he steps in, and in humility, he lifts Kevin Hart up. And then you get into
Oh,
Chris Rock's story and you go, whoa, Chris Rock got his start because of Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy stepped in and out of humility gave Chris Rock like you get, and now you see them, like, they sold out arena at Madison
yeah.
Square Garden. Like, and so what happens is we see people at the peak of their success, and we just think, oh, but if you actually venture into the actual story, you'll actually
Mhm.
find evidences of humility in there that they were able to leverage and use, and be able to say, like, oh, wait a minute, like, this actually is the path to the thing that I'm longing for. It's just the unexpected path,
Mhm.
the humility to grind and to work hard in such a way. And this is true for Christians specifically. Like, I think this is really, really important for us, is that when we work, sometimes we work really hard because we think that if we can work hard, that we can get kind of the things that we want. We can get the peace,
Mhm.
we can get the stability, right? But humility actually helps us to see the value of our work, but won't let us define our worth by what we do. And so, like, humility ends up being a
See, there you are
huge
hurting
gift
my
for us.
feelings again.
Yeah, yeah,
Man.
because yeah. So, I mean, humility helps us see the value of our work, but it won't let us define our worth by what we do.
Oh, that's good. And that is only by God's grace that he doesn't allow us to do that, you know? And I think
Yeah,
that was a
yeah,
piece too that you didn't explicitly say, but I heard you say, when you're talking about like, we have to basically be aware of, biting into the fruit and realizing that it's rotten. Well, that's where God's grace comes in. And I think sometimes people, I know for a fact, there are people that don't want to do self-awareness work because either pride is telling them like, hey, there's some ish under there that you don't want to uncover. Like there's
right.
stuff that you don't want to know about yourself, or they know it's going to be hard or painful, or they realize that with self-awareness is going to come the need to change, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
how does leaning into the hard work of self-awareness then lead to peace?
yeah.
Why is
I
it worth
think
it?
yeah, because once you finally have self-awareness, so you're right. There's a tension point of the self-awareness is that the self-awareness leads us to action or inaction.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, you have to make that decision. Are you willing to act or not act? And
Yeah.
so the temptation is that once I'm aware of these things, that I can just live with the way it is right now. But I just want to point this out. Like, you've been trying that and it hasn't been working.
Yeah.
You've been trying it. Like, you have been trying to do this and you're still living chaotically. You still have, I had a friend the other day who's like, I've got this twitch in my eye and it will not go away.
I
And
hate
I'm
that.
like, well, how's your anxiety in your life? How's your, like, and they're like, high. And I was like, bro, you've got a twitch in your eye. Your body is literally telling you
There is a
like
problem.
there is a problem. And so, like, you can decide, and you're like, it's not that big of a deal. And fine. And that eye twitch turns into high blood pressure and high cholesterol and diabetes. Like, you can go through all the things. And
Mhm.
so the gift of humility is it truly is the self-awareness which leads us to action, to doing the right thing. And then what it does for us is it leads to a rightly ordered life. And so this is where I think people sometimes misunderstand what humility is, because they think that humility will lead us to experience a type of peace that is void or absent of fear, weakness, or pain.
Yeah.
That's not what humility does. And that's
Yeah.
not what the gift of peace on this side of eternity is. The gift
Yeah.
of humility is to experience a type of peace that doesn't dismiss fear, it doesn't deny weakness. It doesn't avoid pain. It's actually a gift that helps us to acknowledge our fears and weaknesses and process our pain in a way that redeems and brings meaning to all the hard stuff that we've endured. And so that's the gift that we need. Like, think about the people of Israel as they're walking through the wilderness and through exile. The gift that they had was actually the presence of God Himself in
Right.
exile,
Right.
right? And 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 what does God do? He goes through exile with them. He leads them through the process. This is what humility does for us. It goes through so that we can actually regain our true humanity. Humility is the gift that actually returns us to the state of our Edenic vision of what Adam and Eve lived in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, where there
Yeah.
was true vulnerability, there was true authentic relationship, that they lived in a posture of humility in the presence of God because they could experience all the beauty of God's good creation. Pride is what actually hijacked that. And so humility is
Mm-hmm.
God's grace to overcome the sinful seduction of pride.
Well, I think you even hit on a misconception that people have of peace, right? That peace, I
Yeah.
think a lot of times people think peace is like, oh, no problems and everything is just like Zen and chill and whatever. But that's not actually what supernatural peace of God is. It's exactly what you said. It means that when that happens, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to have answers, but you can know that you're not in it alone. You can know that
Right.
God's presence is there for you to tap into to make sense of what doesn't make sense, not necessarily through answers, but just through sense of being of his presence.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a weight lifted off of your shoulders, because
Yeah.
what it means is you don't have to have the answers for
You don't
everything
have to do
that's
it.
going on. You don't
Yeah.
have to do it. You don't have to
Yeah.
conjure it up. You don't have to rely on your own strength or power or creative manipulation, like all of that. Like, The gift is you get to live in the reality of what is and
Yeah.
experience the peace and the presence of God and know that he has it because he's the one who has total control. He's the one who's going to establish final peace in the absence of those things when Jesus returns. Like he is the one that we long for. And so it just goes back to how we started with this exchange of yokes, that if you want rest, if you're tired, if you're weary, like trust Jesus when he says, let's do this exchange of yokes. Notice it's an exchange of yokes. It's not a removal of the yoke.
Yeah.
The exchange of yokes is that we get to have a yoke, we get to wear something on us that fits well so that we can actually carry the things that
Mm.
we have to carry on this side of eternity. And then the beauty of it's like there's some ancient, I kind of get into it in the book, but the way that this yoke exchange actually worked in the Greco New Testament world is one of the things was that the yoke was a double-sided yoke. They would have a single yoke and a double-sided yoke. And so
Okay.
there's one way to read this is that when Jesus says, hey, let's do an exchange of yokes, what he's actually inviting us to do is to take the empty slot that's right next to him so that we actually put on the perfect yoke of Christ and we're going. And every time it's hard, every time we're fearful, every time we experience pain, you look over your shoulder and you see to the right, there's Jesus. He's with you. He's walking that
Carrying it
yoke.
with
He's the
you.
one who's
Yeah.
carrying the weight. And when we're tired, he's lifting it up, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful picture for us to consider as we have this, this life that we're living that is hard, that is difficult, that's mixed
Yeah.
with joy and sorrow.
Yeah.
And humility is a gift that helps us like embrace the highest beauty of the joy, but
Yeah.
also deal with and get through the lowest pain of the tragedy.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I like that. I like that visual picture of Jesus. Obviously, we're walking toward Jesus, but of Jesus just kind of being like right there beside me, helping me face whatever it is that I need to face. I don't have to chase after to catch up with him. He's not coming up from behind me, but just him kind of right there. I like that.
Yeah, and that's the language of Galatians 5. The language of Galatians
Yeah.
5 is keep in step with the Spirit, and the
Yeah.
Spirit is the Spirit of Christ. So the Galatians 5 uses three different words: keep in step, walk by, and be led by. And all of it deals with proximity of being right next to the Spirit. And so that's the same idea keeps presenting itself over and over again.
Yeah. Well, friends, I will link up Joel's book. I know it's for pre-order right now. We're very excited for it to come out. Joel, is there anything else that you wanted to say about
Yeah, I
peace
mean,
or humility or Michael Jordan?
oh, yeah. Well, I will say this about the pre-order. If you get the pre-order right now, we have some pre-order bonuses that I think are super fun and awesome. One of them is that you'll get the first 3 chapters right off the bat. And so if you want to have your feelings hurt, I don't know if that's the
Yes.
best marketing pitch now for the book, but if you want to have your feelings hurt, you can walk through the first 3 chapters. You'll get that as soon as you pre-order. But then the other thing that you'll get is I created a resource essentially, and it's called it's basically the origin story of Jesus, or the origin story of Satan, the cost of pride. And I make the connection. One, I think people have a lot of questions about Satan, like who is he, where did he come from,
For sure.
how do we even, so it's like, and I'm a fan of origin stories in general, so I'm like, hey, why not give an origin story of Satan and tie in the great cost that came with Satan's pride so we can learn from this. And so you'll get that instantly as well as you're waiting for the actual book to come your way. And then the last thing I would just say is I really do believe in the season that's coming ahead for all of us. As you just look at the calendar from at the context of politics, from the context of church, from the context of our society, ethical questions and dilemmas, issues of justice, like all these things that are coming our way. I really do believe the thing that is hiding in plain sight that God is gifting to us to navigate these storms in a way that honors Him, honors ourselves, and honors other image bearers of Christ is the gift of humility. And so my deep prayer is that this book, and really the book, would just point you to Jesus and to take on the humble life of Christ so that you can navigate these very complex days that are coming ahead of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that encouragement. Also, friends, just go follow Joel. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for the way that you are always able to take. You can sign up for Joel's Substack, Humble Theology. I love how you're able to take these like massive concepts. There were some words that you said earlier in the show that I was like, I got to write this down because I don't know what that means. But you're always able to explain them in a way that anybody can understand, to better understand scripture and the heart and character of God and all of that. So Thank you for your continued work and words. And we'll get queso soon with the kids.
We'll get queso soon. Absolutely.
I've added the special pre-order link for Hidden Peace to the show notes, so be sure to scroll down to take advantage of the bonus gifts that you get for ordering now, including a deep dive written by Joel that answers the question, how did Satan become the enemy? If there's one thing I know about Joel, it's that when he teaches, be it in written form or on the Stair Stuffer, it's thorough. Be sure to grab his book and follow along with him on social media to get his 60-second theology snippets. And hey, while you're there, you might as well follow us too. You can follow Mosaic Church at Mosaic CLT, or you can follow along with me at Kristin Mockler Young. I've also linked up some other messages and resources on peace, control, and humility below, in case you want to dig more into any of those topics. If you're looking for even more, check out the resources page at mosaicchurch.tv or send us a message at becomingchurch.tv. Until next time, keep becoming the church to the people around you.